Professor Amy Elman is a professor of political science at Kalamazoo College in Michigan. She is a leading scholar on issues of anti-Semitism and its relationship to issues of gender. She's really an amazing scholar and colleague at ISGAP, and it's really an honor that she's here. Thanks for coming all the way. Today's lecture is October the 7th, Gaslighting.
Thank you. So I want to begin right away with just a couple of things. I want to leave at least half an hour for discussion, not just questions, but discussion. And so I'm going to do a couple of things now. One is map out where I'm going, so none of us feel lost, especially those of us who are jet lagged. I'm going to provide a very brief kind of intellectual history of this term gaslight, with the focus on psychology. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a political scientist. After focusing, hold on one second. After focusing on that brief history, I'm going to talk about Hamas. Does that work for you? I'm going to talk about Hamas very briefly because Uzi did that for us yesterday. And after I talk about Hamas, I'm going to briefly go into what it is that happened on October 7th and have a conclusion. So this is about 3 or 4 parts. I'm going to tell you now what my thesis is so that you can understand where I'm going. Essentially, my thesis is that October 7th denial, and specifically the denial of the sexual abuse that was so central to it, is a central part of the delegitimization of Israel. So that denial and delegitimization are 2 separate things. I love Sharansky's 3 Ds, but denial is separate from delegitimization, and I hope to explain why. The other thing is, please don't ask me for solutions. I want you to think critically for yourselves. I don't have solutions. What I have, I hope, is an opportunity to tell you what's going on so that you don't feel gaslighted and you have a language and an understanding of the tactic that's being used against us. We can't have a solution if we don't know what the problem is and we don't understand really how it is that we're being assaulted. So that's what I hope to describe to you today. How is it that we're being assaulted? What is this gaslighting thing? So let me begin. I'm going to go a century back and tell you that while in the previous century, Freud and his followers maligned women and girls who had been sexually abused, and they maligned them as neurotics who had merely imagined their experience. You know, it was a fantasy. That was last century. And in this century, Israelis testifying, not just survivors, Israelis testifying to the sexualized sadism of Hamas have been similarly undermined by those determined to downplay or perhaps outright deny the terror of October 7th. Whatever the similarities in these deceits, there are two key differences that I'll be focusing on today. First key difference, the most fervent deniers were previously men of science, Freud and his followers. And now they are frequently academic women identified as feminist intellectuals. And I want to be very careful with my language. They are identified as feminist intellectuals. But more importantly than those 2 significant differences, this century's targeted sexual abuse and the related denials function as a crucial weapon in the arsenal of those seeking to obliterate Israel and its people. The effectiveness of this particular tactic of denial depends as much on the barbarity of the perpetrators as it does on their women supporters who repeatedly imply, if not outright deny, that this ever happened, and they are unrelenting. I'll be arguing that countering this gaslighting requires that we first understand what gaslighting is before we turn to how and why Hamas has had such success in doing it. So the second slide is gaslighting. This is the first bit. And I want to begin by telling you that lest, and it's very tempting, but lest one dismiss today's deniers as those whose outlandish lies one needn't take seriously because they're so crazy, I want us to recall the enormous influence that Freud and his followers had in ushering in, from a century ago, an age of modern thinking that for decades ignored and excused childhood sexual abuse. Florence Rush in 1971, she was a good friend of mine. In 1971, she provided a groundbreaking expose on Freud that revealed that although he initially believed his women patients were suffering from sexual abuse, his persistent exposure to the incrimination of the fathers of his clients left him on edge. I want to say that one more time. He believed the women who sat on his couch. And what left him on edge in terms of really acknowledging it was the persistent incrimination of their fathers. In strongly identifying with the men of his class, Freud actually altered the record to protect the men of his class, and thus found it necessary to undermine the perceptions of his female patients as fantasy. Eventually, according to Florence Rush, he succeeded in gaslighting an age into ignoring a devastating childhood reality, and that reality is sexual abuse. And his disciples actually surpassed him in that deceit. Because in addition to suppressing the accounts of survivors, in addition to that, his followers insisted on the inferiority of female organs, and the consequences of their deceptions endure, to include, first, a staggering misunderstanding of female sexuality, and second, a cover-up of the sexual exploitation of survivors of sexual abuse, particularly girls. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, please pay attention to the most recent edition of the Atlantic magazine, which has reported, and I quote, "DNA has offered a new kind of biological proof. Proof for what? Proof for what Freudians denied and feminists uncovered decades ago by believing the testimony of women." And what was it that was uncovered through DNA, but what we already knew as feminists decades ago? Incest is actually very far from uncommon, okay? So it's taken us a very long time. The undermining of women's perceptions was famously captured in the advert where the guy's holding that woman's head. It's Ingmar Bergman. It was famously captured in the 1944 film Gaslight. And Gaslight centers on a husband who, having married for money, endeavors to have his wife institutionalized by altering her faith in the world that she inhabits. An ambition, I would argue, that is not altogether different from that of terrorists, to have us alter our perception and our faith in the world that we inhabit. What the husband did in the film is he does things like intentionally misplace his wife's belongings. He entreats her servants to do things that he later denies. And he convinces his wife that a flickering gaslight is actually steady. And as a result, gradually, his wife questions her own faculty as her husband feigns concern. It's a very powerful lesson that the movie's title has become a verb to depict the manipulations that make one doubt their own perception of reality is a testament to the power of that 1944 film that exposed something that we're experiencing now, which is indoctrination. Now, Florence Rush was a great thinker, and so she was reluctant to attribute gaslighting solely to the fallacies of Freud and his followers. And what she did in her work was she implicated the age in which their logic reigned to replace religious mysticism. And they did this under the auspices of science and reason that seemingly enlightened men like Freud. Those men had credibility, the likes of which were denied other people. And they did this under the pretense of science. And she talks about that. I want to make the argument that Florence Rush was no less a product of her time. And what I mean by that was that she was inspired by and wrote for, in 1971, a burgeoning feminist movement. And it was a movement that questioned the science of men like Freud. Okay? But Florence Rush and feminists did so without abandoning logic and science. Indeed, it was her Florence Rush's methodical attention to detail, empirical evidence, and logic that helped to expose Freud's ruse. And yet, what started to happen is dissatisfaction mounted with the old orthodoxies of those like Freud. Feminists began to distrust science, if not absolutely reject it. And so one of the things that happened was postmodernists, there is no such thing as a fact, all of this. Nobody has even authors don't have authority over the texts they present, whatever it is that you think, right? Postmodernists soon became the beneficiaries of that kind of skepticism, that radical skepticism. So that by the 1990s, we're confronted with something else. By the 1990s, modern science seemed little more than a myth. It's a narrative. Science is a social construct. And those whose lives had been so belittled by science, by scientific pretense, I would say, may have welcomed that development. However, I would argue that postmodernism was ill-positioned to provide those who had been harmed with any relief. Why? Because its epistemic relativism and postmodernism's disdain for facts enabled postmodernism's proponents to paper over injustices as a matter of perspective. Oh, that's just your perspective, as opposed to objective reality. So what starts to happen is the tables turn. As the tables turned on fact-based discourse, we had naysayers in the 1990s who sounded the alarm for us. And in the 1990s, they were noticing that students were departing campuses with little more, I see this all the time, with little more, so they're not to be blamed, it's their professors too, it goes way back, with little more than a kind of exaggerated skepticism towards evidence. Right? That's what we were left with. And in 1993, Deborah Lipstadt, in Denying the Holocaust, a very famous Holocaust scholar who gave us Denying the Holocaust, despaired, and she despaired that the increasingly popular relativistic approach to truth extended legitimacy to Holocaust deniers. She writes this in 1993. A few years later, Martha Nussbaum, a feminist philosopher, noted that women's studies, we could actually be women then, women's studies programs were renouncing material reality for symbolic politics. And if you were Martha Nussbaum attributed this, and she was going after Judith Butler in this article, she attributed this to postmodernism's influence and its preference for very obscure discourse over concrete proposals that would actually improve women's lives. We moved from women's studies to gender studies, now it's sexuality studies. Let's call it sexuality studies. The harder sciences, and I think of you, Henny, the harder sciences thought that they were immune. Oh, it's the humanities, these people who do fiction, they do literature. And then those of us in social science, oh, those are the folks in English, they can't get people to their courses, so they do this, right? And then the economists in social science said, oh, it's the anthropologists, it's not us. Everybody, it's not us. And particularly the hard sciences, it's not them. But in the 1990s, there were two physicists, and they had noted how postmodernists had repeatedly abused scientific terminology to bolster their authority, and they came out with the book, we can discuss it later, they called it Fashionable Nonsense, because this was actually going on as well, going back decades, it was going on in the hard sciences as well. And those physicists were very concerned with others, that the public, so it's not now post-2007, they were very concerned that the public would understandably lose its faith in higher education. And they anticipated that conditions would go, in the 1990s, conditions, they said, will go from bad to even worse. And they predicted at the time that faculty, deprived of the limited authority that we had even then, would become either servile advocates of those with power, or that we would retreat entirely, see if this sounds familiar, from any kind of political discourse. We would completely retreat from political engagement. And they also warned, not least, that religious zealots and dogmatists would step in to fill the void. And so I think one of the questions that we're confronted with today is, how right were these alarms that these scholars raised going back in the 1990s? This was forecast 25 years ago. And I think, as some of you were nodding, this sounds very familiar. I think that this kind of captures what's going on in campuses now, and they kind of help to explain the very eager endorsements, the complicitous endorsements of Hamas, the complicitous silence, and the equivocations of campus actors and others to the largest massacre of Jews on a single day since the Holocaust. What we're witnessing is administrations that had previously, they're not great, they boosted their brands. Columbia is a brand, it's a brand. Yale is a brand, my college is a brand. They boosted their brands through corporate speak against racism, against xenophobia, against homophobia, ableism, other maladies. That was all corporate speak, folks. It wasn't authentic. And then all of a sudden, you'll note, they pivoted to institutional neutrality. And thus, whether or not intended, I don't care about their intents. They helped provide a kind of permission slip for the explosion of anti-Semitism that followed in the wake of October 7th. The blood is not even dried on the ground, and you can watch how they behaved. So that's some. And still, there were others. There were definitely others, like Haverford College president Wendy Raymond, who provided no pretense at all of neutrality. Instead, she reportedly told Jewish students that October 7th should be, quote, understood as people breaking free from their chains. So I want to spend time thinking about who's Hamas, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time because that was done well yesterday. Right? Who's Hamas, and from whom and how is it that they wish to break free? So as we know from yesterday, Hamas is an acronym. We go back to 1987. It's an acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement that's been officially, and this needs to be said, Hamas has been, it's not my opinion, it has been officially designated as a terrorist group by the United States. You can, oh, of course it's the United States. Canada, the UK, Australia, most recently Argentina, Japan, of course Israel, and 27 member states of the European Union. So these are governments that explicitly recognize that we're talking about a terrorist organization. Now I want to talk about its initial charter, because Uzi was both very right in some respects and a little bit wrong. He said, when somebody asked the question yesterday, you know, like what's changed between 1988 and 2017, he's like, it's the same. I want to explain why it is the same, but they know us, he said. And so I want to explain how it is they know us. So we'll go back to 1988. In 1988, as now, and he's right, the charter calls for Israel's complete destruction as an essential ingredient of Palestinian liberation. So you need to know that when some people are talking about liberation, they're not talking about liberation in the way that you might think about liberation. I think about liberation in the Palestinian people. I want them to be free of Hamas. Right? But that's not what's going on. Liberation for them necessitates the obliteration of Israel. And in the charter, it explicitly calls on eschewing all forms of compromise, which is what you see on campuses now with student organizations saying, I can't talk to you. It's right out of the charter. It's like a cookbook. You don't have to read like a lengthy My Struggle from Hitler. This is very easy. Just read through the charters. It won't take you long. And in eschewing all compromise, it explicitly calls upon Muslims to murder Jews for what? For having usurped Palestinian land. And I want to address the role of women because it's absolutely crucial, and I think that's why I'm here today. In the original charter of 1988, women were permitted, this is the language, they're permitted to, I want to get this absolutely right, permitted to fight the enemy, the Jew. Oh, that's nice. You have permission to fight the enemy. But it says in 1988 that their primary role is, and this is key, the primary role of women was as a maker of men. Very important. That's the primary, in 1988, that's the language. Women's primary role is not the maker of children, the maker of men. In adopting a revised charter of 2017, why then? It's on the heels of the 10th anniversary of Hamas's takeover of Gaza. Hamas now declares that, and I quote, its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews because of their religion. So there are ways of reading. I'll read it the way that many of your students will read it. I want to go back. It's not with the Jews, right? It's with the Zionist project. So, like, come JVP, Papa, it's not with the Jews. No, it doesn't. We have to read carefully. The conflict in 2017 is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews because of their religion. Very important. So they're like, I'm not religious. I get a free pass. I'm going to join JVP. If you read it all the way through, you'd realize, hence, what Hamas is doing is it's directing its ire against, and you've heard this on campuses again and again, the racist, aggressive, colonial, and expansionist Zionist project by all means and methods. You hear it as by any means necessary. I want you to remember this. If somebody tells you that they believe in anything by all means necessary, you should tell them, now I know I can't even believe you, because any means, like the most benevolent end of that is, I am deceitful and I can lie. By any means necessary. At the opposite end, it can really mean murder. So when somebody and that's what needs, I know that they think it's cool, but you have to tell them they've just undermined themselves as of having any authority in your mind. And so Uzi's correct in that what shifted then was not the ambition of Hamas to obliterate the Jewish state and the Jewish people, but, and here's where I come in, what shifted was the rhetoric of 2017 to appeal to young folks on campuses and progressive organizations, and its reliance on women, because they're no longer going to be just the maker of men. Women in 2017, quote, are to play a pivotal role in the project of resistance and liberation. This is right from 2017, we have to pay attention. Play a pivotal role in the liberation and building of a political system, not a state. We can come back to that. And so this pivot to a seemingly more restrained rhetoric and significantly more active role for women stems, I think, because these are tacticians, it stems from a very hard-nosed calculation about how to do what, about how best to obliterate Israel. So you restrain your rhetoric, you talk about liberation, and you talk about women to accomplish this end. Devorah Margolin, who I'm quoting here, explained that, what led to this quote, from 1993 to 2000, Israel was able to preempt 30% of suicide bombing men. And Margolin noted that Palestinian women were able to have greater freedom of movement and access to potential targets. And she's talking about the physicality of war. In this climate, Palestinian groups, including Hamas, this is the quote, were aware of women's strategic and operational advantages and Hamas leveraged women to circumvent detection and carry out attacks. Bingo. That approach for Margolin, and she is somebody who thinks in terms like a lot of people, bombs and munitions and suicide bombings. That approach, I want you to realize, extends as well to Hamas's cognitive war. I'll explain. In December of 2022, the head of the Hamas's women's movement. So this isn't like who's head of the women's movement in the United States, Linda Sarsour or I don't know, Gloria Steinem. That's not that kind of society. It's a totalitarian regime. They have a women's movement, and they put in head of the women's movement a speaker who's the head of the women's movement. And in December of 2022, this woman called on young girls in Gaza, she called on them to martyrdom. And then she boasted. She said that a majority of Gaza's kindergarten teachers belong to Hamas, and she explained on television that they had helped raise children to love jihad. Months later, that was December 22, months later, I'll be arguing that women well beyond Gazan kindergartens have knowingly or unknowingly continued to serve Hamas in its cognitive war as intellectual apologists for and even celebrants and or deniers of what transpired on October 7th. And so the next slide. And I want to begin here. I want to explain to you why I begin here. It is heartbreaking that October 7th, Simchat Torah has become synonymous with terror. So I want us to recall, given what Michal asked us to do from the plenary session, I want us to recall who we are and what our history is. I want us to recall, number one, that this was Shabbat, a day of rest, a day of peace. And that it was also Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah is a Jewish holiday that marks the conclusion of one annual cycle of the public reading of Torah and the start of another cycle. This is what you see. And it's a day, so you understand the Nova Festival. I really want us to understand this. It is a day in which Jews dance enthusiastically with Torah so that it is said that we Jews become the legs of Torah. That's what it is. And the Nova Dance Festival, I very rarely hear anybody really articulate what it was, is the Nova Dance Festival is the secular expression of Judaism's joy. And to quote Michal on the first day, it was a wonderful opening, that plenary session. It's about Judaism's joy and the resilience. Remember the 3 R's? It's the resilience and the renewal of the Jewish people. That's this. That is October 7th, in the Jewish calendar, that day. I don't want to like every October 7th, right? That's Simchat Torah. Now, forgive me, we're going to move from what it was to what it became. The next slide will show you this. On October 7th, Hamas and its supporters, right, women as well as kids as young as 10, Hamas and its supporters targeted the festival, that Nova Dance Festival, where they pulverized the pelvises of those whom they raped, and they raped men as well, women and girls they raped. They cut off their breasts, they tossed them about, they bound, gagged, and shot bullets into the heads and vaginas of their victims. They beheaded others, and they burnt people alive. That's all the description I'm going to give right now. Captured terrorists acknowledged that the sexual violence of that day was intentional, and and you know how it's intentional because the premeditated nature of that violence is evidenced in, among other things, a translation key that was found on one of its fighters, a translation key. And the translation key, so I mean, they came prepared, was in Hebrew, and it said, take off your pants. Those 4 words help to account for the piles of corpses that were later found naked below the waist. And in sync with the technology and the zeitgeist of our times, the terrorists actually posted selfies of their exploits from their cell phones and body cameras to the thrill of their own relatives. They're not embarrassed. To their own relatives, the larger public, and the devastation of the Jewish world, and the friends and the families of their victims. I'm going to tell you that Hamas's behavior, for me, was reminiscent of the Serbian fascists who used rape and the pornography that they made of it as, in the words of former colleague Natalie Nenadech, as a public spectacle to induce women to leave. This is what the Serbian fascists said, induce women to leave and never return. That one set of perpetrators did this for Serbia, and the other did it to free Palestine, doesn't mean that rape was then or that it is now the only tool in the toolbox of terrorists. And it doesn't also mean that only women and girls were the victims of sexual abuse. One man, most recently, within the last week or so, has come forward from the festival to talk about how he was raped. He endured incredible brutality at the head of a Hamas elite unit as he tried to escape the festival. But Hamas also forced Israeli hostages, including a young boy of 12, to repeatedly watch the videos that they made of that day, just like the Serbian fascists. And held alone for 6 weeks, they told this boy that his kibbutz and that Israel no longer existed. And for those who remain in captivity, we know that the sexual abuse continued, and the gaslighting surrounding that and what they're doing to them and us through them continues. Now, for those who were freed, and nobody talks about this, for those who were freed and the countless number of Israelis that who have been displaced from their homes, the road to recovery is likely to be very long, and it continues, and it's uncertain. And this is a condition that's typically ignored in news coverage that attends almost exclusively to the suffering of Palestinians whose higher death toll, to be sure, whose higher death toll exists, but is actually welcomed by Hamas. Why? We need to understand this because it furnishes Hamas with an upper hand to delegitimize Israel. That Hamas's sadism has been repeatedly hailed as resistance testifies to several things at once. First, to the indifference that they have to lost lives, including of their own people, the depth of anti-Semitism, and the sexual abuse that's so central to all of this. Hamas's women supporters have, as women, evaded charges of sexism while playing a significant role in silencing survivors and both trivializing and casting doubt that the sex abuse and the crimes of October 7th even occurred. So this is the next slide. The defiance and feigned incredulity that these women have is that they direct towards survivors is absolutely pernicious, and it goes back. They're defiant deniers. I want to address the defiance first. So well before October 7th, in 2006, Judith Butler eagerly endorsed Islamists as left-oriented social justice warriors. 2006. She had to apologize a little bit. Now this is the norm. Immediately after October 7th, those like the former assistant professor at GWU of psychology, you can't make any of this up, and also president of the American Psychological Association section on psychoanalysis, issued tweets that targeted the little bitches who dared to depict Hamas as the terrorists they are. And she does this, "How dare you slander the names of our martyrs as terrorists?" A refrain that was echoed by authoritarians worldwide, not least including Turkey's Erdogan, who, like Judith Butler, declared Hamas isn't a terrorist organization, but a liberation group. So next slide. Like Holocaust deniers, these women dispute the direct testimonies of Jews and all of the forensic evidence as malicious lies. And so I want us to consider for a moment this one to the left, the adjunct professor of gender and women's studies at Berkeley, who in attending an Oakland City Council meeting to condemn Israel's response to Hamas, states that October 7th was so postmodern, a fabricated narrative. And then she explained many of those killed on October 7th, including children, were killed by, the IDF. Weeks later, to our right, there's another one. And these are all over the country this is popping up. And all over the world. This isn't just in the United States. You have a professor of gender, women, and sexuality studies at the University of Minnesota who spoke as a rape crisis counselor and compared Israeli rape survivors to white women whose racist fabrications of rape against black men in the segregated South of the United States led to lynching. This one should be charged with plagiarism. This position parroted the rape denialism that was cast weeks earlier by the Electronic Intifada, which in its podcast and its webcast stressed the absence of, quote, first-hand testimony while completely denying why victims were no longer available to provide testimony, because they murdered them. The one woman on the panel at the Electronic Intifada who was presenting likened the murderers to Emmett Till. Emmett Till, for those of you who don't know, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black boy who was falsely accused of offending a white woman in a Mississippi grocery store in 1955. Thus, the panelists, and later so many others, have cast Jews as white nationalists and terrorists and as the victims of false allegations. Because Hamas is like Emmett Till, 14-year-old black boy in a grocery store in 1955. I want us to know that this is an increasingly common deflection that we call DARVO, for those of us who deal with live sexual abuse. DARVO stands for, so that we know, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. I want you to know DARVO because that is what we're subjected to constantly. It entails, in this particular instance, sexual abuse perpetrators consistently, and their apologists consistently attacking the veracity of their victims. To what end? So that they can assume the position of victim. That's what they do. That's what DARVO is. And the electronic intifada and its followers engaged then in the reversal of victim and rapist through what? Device, it plays very well on US campuses in particular, by a race baiting discrediting that depicts Jews as white nationalists and thus declares the terrorists as victims of false allegations that not even, I would argue, not even the proponents of Freud and his false memory syndrome folks and the far right could have ever dreamed of. This is denial on steroids. Silencing survivors of sexual abuse under the guise of feminist anti-racism is both profoundly sexist and is profoundly racist. And it also ensures further anguish by legitimating rape as resistance, but not least. And this is something that all of us should be concerned, we should be concerned with all of it, but not least. This entails a mobilization that's likely to usher in corroboration requirements that feminists got rid of, like Florence Rush, in the 70s and throughout the world in the 80s. We said that when a woman's assaulted, was there a witness to that, right? We got rid of corroboration requirements. Folks, they're on their way back. This is the discourse. And with the Holocaust and October 7th emblematic of evil, these deniers actually have furthered anti-Semitism by convincing others that the crimes for which Jew hating can so clearly be blamed never even happened. There's in my ear, Deborah Lipstadt. And the Washington Post actually covered this. They covered this in an article they wrote about a woman who, after having initially been appalled by Hamas's attack, visited truther sites, anti-Zionist truther sites, and following her exposure to those sites, she claimed that Israel had issued false flags. And thus she concluded, quote, Israel is a mad dog off the leash. And I don't want to, it's just Israel, or it's just, it's just the West, or it's just the United States. A Hebrew University professor who identifies as Palestinian similarly declared, and I quote, if it, meaning the rapes, if it didn't happen, then it's shame on the state. And then she declared that Israel was using women's bodies and sexuality to promote political agendas for what end? To endorse the further disposition and killing of Palestinians. And what was her solution to the alleged deceit of Israel? Abolish Zionism. And when the university suspended her, they did so stating, and I think rightly, it's not possible to teach social work by declaring that rape didn't happen. And what was her response? The professor claimed, I didn't deny the rapes. And technically she's correct. She did not explicitly deny the rapes. She simply implied that they might not have happened, and that as a feminist, she believes all victims, a position that paralleled all of the equivocations that I've been talking about. And although this is so fascinating, how do we know this? It's on the front page of the New York Times, and now in the New Yorker. Although Hebrew University reinstated the professor 2 days later, front page of the New York Times characterized Israel as repressive, as did its new opinion writer, Masha Gessen, who writing right now for the New Yorker a month later. So it's the gift that keeps on giving these denials. Ignoring the professor's sophistry, these journalists scolded Israel's academic institutions for inhibiting free speech and academic freedom. They focused on the cycle of persecution that the professor endured. And then the New York Times slid in, the United Nations was unable to independently verify the rape allegations that Hamas still denies. Interestingly, nowhere noted in any of this is this absolute censure that the UN body would have received from its 50+ Muslim majority constituent states had it recognized Hamas's subterfuge. So whether through ignorance or malintent, these are the kinds of outlets, and so many others, that have helped minimize, if not discredit and deny, the perceived claims of Israelis who, context is really important, are gathering and still analyzing massive data while a war is going on. This is what's going on. Sexual abuse and its plausible deniability serve Hamas's long game. What's the long game? The long game of Hamas is to obliterate the authority of Israel to defend itself and its people. As Anat Wilf notes, the state of Israel was born not after the Holocaust, so that never again. The state of Israel, she reminds us, was intended to be born by Zionist leaders before the Holocaust, so never at all. Frustrated, deeply frustrated by the protection that Israel has long provided its citizens protection, and those of us who are in the diaspora. Anti-Semites placed the Jewish state in their crosshairs for that. As a political scientist, I love doing that. No, I really hate it when people speak as. I am a political scientist. I don't speak as a political. I am a woman. I don't speak as a woman. I am a Jew. I don't speak as a Jew. You know, I mean, all this. So forgive me. In political science, we note that states are defined by their monopoly on the legitimate use of force within a given territory. Okay. That means that terrorists can inflict grievous damage without even having to triumph militarily, because authority matters. With its revised 2017 charter, Jonathan Halevi observed that Hamas, he writes this in 2017, Hamas could achieve its political objectives by subverting Israel's right to self-defense through propaganda, diplomatic pressures, resolutions, court rulings. You don't need to have a military victory. And so to service these efforts, he wrote, Hamas assigns a special importance to liberal, we can say progressive now, right? To liberal organizations and activists in the world who support the Palestinian struggle. My modest contribution is women, I would add, have played a really central role, because it's through women that Hamas circumvents detection as it curries favor across campuses and so many other institutions that have influence. And that influence in turn informs the court of public opinion. And in coveting the support of liberal forces, Hamas is less interested, you should know, it goes back to the gaslighting thing, it's less interested in political alliances than marriages of convenience. Hamas is an especially attractive partner for anybody who's been discomforted by two great success stories of the last century. What were those success stories? First, the reemergence of an autonomous feminist movement, not socialist feminism, postmodern feminism, queer feminism, this kind of feminism, the autonomous movement. That was one. They were troubled by that. And the second one was the establishment of a Jewish state. The first of these exposed and delegitimized male power and sexualized violence. The second, the Jewish state, offered Jews a modicum of protection against the excesses of Jewish hatred. And Hamas's women helpmates assist in indulging the sexualized terror of that organization, and it does so by minimizing or denying what the perpetrators did. And those thinking that this is just about Israel haven't been paying attention. So here we go with the next slide. In an age of 24/7 misinformation, pornographic rage, and the subsequent normalization of sexual abuse, sexual terror has become a choice weapon among Jew haters worldwide. So you can consider the rape of a 12-year-old girl in France by boys for the crime of being Jewish. You can recall how in 2021, and again this summer, British jihadists are demanding the rape of Jewish women and girls from the streets of London, where they live. You can reflect on the protesters who raged against Nova New York City exhibit that was meant to honor and to document those who had been raped and slaughtered by Hamas at the Nova Dance Festival. Insisting that that exhibit, by the way, was Zionist propaganda, the folks protesting flew Hamas flags and carried banners with slogans like, "Long live October 7th." And another one stated, and I quote, "The Zionists are not Jews and not humans." Witnessing the appropriation of Jewish identity, poisonous rhetoric, and murderous assaults on Jews from a seemingly safe distance, onlookers engage in victim blaming. And I've heard this word, so I want us to be sensitive to this. And they declare Israel is and or has been provocative. Israel has become, I would argue, less the gender-neutral collective Jew among nations than a woman who, unentitled to the possession of her own body, is brutally assaulted in a world in which she is told that she does not belong. And dependent on the apparent kindness of others, she is disparaged from defending herself and is instead expected to identify with and actually provide support to those who seek to destroy her. This should sound very familiar. Counseled to submit for her own good and that of others, peace in the region, whatever, the actions of her perpetrators are ignored and or they are excused. I'll try. What I'm trying to say is, Israel's a girl. This is so painful because, especially Israeli men and Jewish men who meanwhile are like, are women. And it's like, dude, you're the girl. Israel's the girl. It's very painful. It's horrible. So she provoked, Israel provoked. Israel's not allowed to defend herself. Somebody else says, in America, we're going to step in. We've got your back, Biden. Whatever, right? Oh, thank you so much. And then on top of everything, she's supposed to be like, how can I help you? You've just attacked me. Here, here's some food. I mean, this is insanity. And she's expected to identify with the very people who want to destroy her. This is insane. And then she's counseled to submit for her own good. It's good for you. Pause. A humanitarian pause. We don't like ceasefire, we'll call it humanitarian pause. It's good for you and it'll be good for everybody else. And all of this is going on and nobody's focusing on it. It's like, no. Like, it's a major charade. And then nobody's focusing on the perpetrators, who they're ignoring and or excusing. And to treat these perpetrators any differently, I would add, seems unfair. It's mean. It's indecent. It's impossible. Because boys will be boys. Like, well, those of us women in the room, he pulls your hair. He likes you. I mean, this is insane. And by contrast, what is her crime? I told you what their crime is. They want to destroy us. Her crime, Israel's crime, by contrast, is her existence. And I'll end by telling you that seemingly reasonable people within the secular citadels of higher education ask, and it's come up even here, or we even have this discussion, so please forgive me, I hope this doesn't offend you, it drives me crazy. Does she have a right to exist? Does Israel have a right to exist? Suggests already the implied conclusion that she lacks the necessary humanity to do so. So recall that banner. Jews are not human. That's how we get there. That's dehumanization. So the next slide, I have to tell you, I bring this to your attention. I really do. In closing, not because I think it's impossible to change. Oh, no, back one. Not because, that one, the next one can come later if we need. I ask you to think about this, not because I think it's impossible to change, but I actually think it's only possible to change when we really grasp the sexual dimensions of the war that's being waged against us. I really think that. And so this is a synopsis of, I hope, the journey. I hate all of these cliches. But where we were, where we got, right? This is where we are. They're no different than Freud, who identifies with the fathers. He knows. So we've got many women I've discussed are altering the record to protect these guys. And in doing, they're undermining the evidence. And so, and I don't believe in solutions. We have to understand this before we can even then talk. We have to understand their tactics before we can move on. Fantastic, because we've got half an hour. I want half an hour for just conversation.
Amy, thank you for your insights, wisdom, and your brilliance. You illuminate such important dimensions to the whole struggle of understanding and then fighting anti-Semitism and hatred. So thank you. You want to stay there or come here?
I like standing that way.
Thank you for that. That was
Okay.
That's okay?
I don't know where the mic is.
Oh, no, I'll speak it. I'll speak it.
I think you follow me.
I did, but is there a mic that can, so that everybody can hear you?
Excuse me. Okay, Hannibal, and then we'll go here.
Where's the mic?
That's okay.
You have the mic. Do you have the mic? So whoever's speaking, do they have the mic?
There's
So
no
everybody.
mic, so just speak.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll speak up. I just, I couldn't help but notice that one of the persons in the picture with the hostage in the back of the truck,
Yes.
it was a black man. And, that's sort of a new dimension for me, I think a lot of people. It, sort of is reminiscent of, I think when ISIS, they beheaded like a Christian, Ethiopian, black Christian. And a lot of people in my community finally began to start taking ISIS seriously. You know, they feel like we couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. And so, I guess my question is, thank you so much. I guess my question is, do you believe this connection, this black connection to Hamas is a religious thing, it's sort of like a Salafia thing? Is there like a black contingent in Hamas, or because, is it something that has been sort of overlooked? Do you think? Because honestly, I mean, as a black man who also, you know, direct like an African American Studies program at a university, it kind of, I think, goes in line with some of the things that you're saying. There's this sort of monster black man mentality out there, and then when we sort of see that on the picture, it kind of, I don't know, I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, can I just, so I really want to have a conversation. I want to know what you think of that. I really want to know what you think in trying to explain that. What is it that you really think in trying to explain that particular image? Maybe we can go back. Oh, Martha's gone.
Martha, the other.
Oh, does that work? No, hold on. Okay. So we'll hold on. Okay. Right? Okay. So that's troubling. Right? That's what you're saying. It's troubling. And doesn't that play into the very stereotypes, right?
He might be from Sudan or Egypt. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
So-
So, also a part of Egypt, which is nothing.
Go ahead, I couldn't hear you.
You're saying they
I wanna have a
could be
conversation.
Sudan or Egypt. They could be from Sudan or Egypt.
Any black person, I mean, I just want to know what's the connection to Hamas, basically.
So I think that and this is hard for Americans in particular, right? I think the American binary of black and white, as you're pointing out, does not transfer automatically to that context. One. Two, I think that your shock is completely understandable because it's precisely images of this that aren't shown. Intentionally, although it's a well-known image, and I also don't like showing this too much because I wanted to focus on Simchat Torah, doesn't correspond to the dominant narrative that Jews supposedly are all white, which is also not true. Right? All of this is a very American narrative. And what they have been spending, what Hamas, when I quoted Halavi, and he's talking about all of the use of liberal organizations in the United States, just as women's organizations, and I didn't spend too much time, women's organizations from 1975 have been used to promote the narrative that Israel's an apartheid state. One of the things that you see most recently, so I'll give you some, you can look at the literature. I'm not related to her. Her name is Miriam Elman, and she's written about the deadly exchange, which is a movement that understandably seeks to go after, it has co-opted a movement that seeks to diminish police violence, particularly against people of color. And one of the things that it has done is it has said that Israelis are training American police officers to do this. So this is the narrative that one gets throughout the United States, which is why using Emmett Till in that way had particular resonance. This is, if anything's like colonialistic, imperialistic, it's this kind of narrative that constructs us into these kinds of racial categories that, quite frankly, as your colleagues are saying, but this is in Egypt, or this is, it doesn't apply, it doesn't transfer that well. And so we can't even see what's in front of us. And by the way, it's not just Egypt and the Middle East or the United States. I lived in Sweden, the same stupidity. Like people, Americans would come and they would go, oh, there's no racism here at all. The Swedes are just all fantastic. Well, one, they had the first Center for the Study of Racial Biology where at Uppsala University, where I was teaching for a year. That's Uppsala. And what they didn't understand is the super blonde-haired folks that were cleaning the streets were actually Finnish. But because they don't speak Swedish, they didn't understand the racialization, different kind of racialization. So racialization works in lots of different ways. And yes, this is what's going on. But
just a quick point also, the Nation of Islam and Mark Lamont Till really pushed up this MAM trend that
I want to get rid of this.
Training American police officers. Sure.
I want us to focus on something.
Yes, thank you. Amy, that was totally stunning presentation, thank you, and kind of makes me, as a woman with agency and, a long career of doing stuff, makes me want to curl up into a fetal position and hide under the table, because it fits really well, and it also points up where it's such a painful moment for feminists, Jewish feminists, liberals who have stood up for the ideals, right? And we're about to have the NOVA exhibit in Los Angeles, where I live, and I'm going to see it in the preview in a couple of weeks. And I don't know if there will be protests outside.
There will be.
There probably will be. There were protests when they showed the IDF footage, which I went to. I wanted to ask a question first about your comment about the UN, which maybe I misunderstood. I think you said that the UN, it has denied that there's evidence where, I know that the rapporteur, special rapporteur, has gone to Israel and reported back to the Security Council.
Okay, so can I thank you, because I want to be clear. The United Nations did recognize that, see if this sounds familiar, that the sexual atrocities are likely to have occurred. Does this sound like, rape happened, right? Somebody fell into poverty. Oh, I was walking along, fell into poverty, right? There's no agent. The UN, in even recognizing that the abuse likely happened, didn't explicitly acknowledge that Hamas did it. So we're familiar with this, I think many of us, like, oh, this happened to you or something. She was raped. There's never discussion of who did what, and so that's what I wanted to, does that make it clearer?
Yeah, because I just looked it up and they did say that.
Okay.
Yes, but it is, when you have feminists who, I mean, I don't know if they still maintain those comments that they said at the time, but they were saying that, I dealt with a lot of women who have undergone sexual assault. As a journalist based in Hollywood, as I said before, we covered the Me Too movement a lot, so I got used to talking to women about their experiences, and many of them are not able to talk about it. So the idea that women didn't also step up and say, hey, I was raped in the immediate aftermath of October 7th is so counter to all of the scholarship and all of the experience and the lived experience and everything we have learned about how we treat women who have been raped. And the women's movement know that. So they had to willingly ignore all of the, the body of knowledge that we have accumulated around believing women, and women speak in their time that many do not speak of the trauma, many sometimes ever. I've talked to many women who's talked their sexual assault 20 years before and finally came forward, encouraged by other women, for example.
Exactly. And now, let's put this in Israeli context. This is going on in the midst of a war. And the reason that I didn't even want to show, I really didn't want to show that October 7th, I'll tell you why. Because the families don't want their kids to be remembered that way. So you're 100% correct.
It's horrible.
Yeah. 100% correct.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the ending of your presentation. One of the last sentences said that, so it says thinking critically is our first defense against this.
Yes,
I wanted to ask you, is for us to think critically, is that sufficient? And what do we do about the people who are not interested in speaking to those, to Zionists?
who think?
Yeah, to those who are not interested in having dialogue. So is it enough for us to think critically? And if not, how can we have influence on people who are not interested in having conversations and thinking critically about the situation?
Okay. So now you're in an airplane and you have to put the oxygen on. So you can't begin to help the person next to you unless you have oxygen. And for me, you can't begin to do anything unless you're able to think. So I just want us to be able to get our brains on, not be gaslighted. And then you're not going to be going 20 rows back right away. You can only influence those who are receptive. Hamas told folks that no compromise, no conversation. You're told that. So you're never going to be able to reach someone like that. They've already decided. They're impervious. And by the way, Sartre said this. I don't like Sartre in many ways, but he said, anti-Semite has chosen to be anti-Semitic. In other words, as bigots in general, bigots are impervious to reason. Don't try. Do try. Keep your head on, be sane, think critically, and engage with people who are going to be receptive. And I have to tell you, now I'm watching several months later, and the hopeful part of me notices that as they become more and more crazy, people are becoming fed up.
Yep.
People are real, and those are the people that you want to talk to because they're fed up, because they're kind of gaslit and they don't know what to think. And now you're thinking critically. Talk to them. You'll be fine. You will be fine. Do not allow yourself to go crazy by trying to convince somebody who's already decided that they hate you and they want to kill you. This is a waste of time.
So before Isaac, also in the opening remarks, I spoke about how in Jewish ethics, Emmanuel Levinas says we need to see, once we see our face in the face of the other, we become human, we need the other to be human. He also equally said, this comes out of Pirkei Avot, when there's a social movement that does not see the other as human, and Hamas and political Islam, the Islamists, see Jews literally emanating from the urine of donkeys and apes and pigs. They do not see us as human. There is no dialogue. There's no compromise. There's no engagement. They don't see us as human. There's something to talk about.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to share something that I made me think of. it's and I don't know if things have changed since October 7th, but somewhat of the extraordinary cognitive dissonance I've personally encountered between there's people who are denying that October 7th occurred, and at the same time they're celebrating, or in complete jubilation. And this was
That's good.
And this was taken home personally when I was on my way to Kalamazoo a few months ago to speak, and some guy from the International Red Cross was sitting next to me, and when he found out I was Jewish, he immediately inquired as to what I thought of the situation. I didn't bring it up, and it went literally within 25 minutes from Chicago to Kalamazoo, across Lake Michigan, from denial to justification, to blaming Israel for genocide, to the fact that I was complicit in it. And it temporarily shut him up when I told him that I had worked in The Hague and had personally investigated ISIS for atrocities. Needless to say, I'm glad the flight was as short as it was. But it just, again, makes me think, and I've encountered this now more than once in certain areas, including in the human rights field.
So here's something, I really thank you for that anecdote, because I forgot to mention something else that they do. Men who perpetrate abuse against women. Oh, Charles, are you okay? One of the things that they really enjoy, after they know what it is that they've done, is to pretend they didn't do anything at all. So I think one of the things that we really have to understand is that they know what they're doing. And what that man did to you, he knew what he was doing. They want to hurt us. And so that's why I did Darvo. I want us to know, okay, this is this jerk. He's going to pretend that he has no idea. And he's going to try to entrap me in various ways. They delight in this. They know exactly what they did. And then they deny in denying. And then when they watch us go crazy because we want to indulge in a conversation with them that's logical, that gets them even more excited. Like I do with, I also do the same thing with men who I know have abused women. No. Please keep away from me. And the same thing with somebody who's going to behave like that. I'm not talking about engaging with people, but we need to, and you couldn't because you're sitting next to the jerk. Anyway. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I almost didn't want to contribute to the conversation because it went from intellectual to emotional, and I hate to bring it back to intellectualizing something that is so deeply emotional. But if you'll forgive me for kind of taking the conversation in that direction. I've been thinking a lot about denial and about gaslighting. The specifics of gaslighting of October 7th and what happened in terms of sexual violence and other types of violence. We could broaden the lens to kind of a denial of, and this is a very American term, but the racial reality of Jews that goes beyond that. There's a lot of kind of gaslighting around anti-Semitism that includes, but is not limited to this. And so something I've been thinking about, particularly with this presentation, are theories of attitude change. And thinking about how changes in attitudes and actions that are produced by social influence. So not Hamas themselves, but when we're talking about this reaction in the West, right? So it's produced by social influence. And they do occur at different levels. And they occur at the level of compliance, they occur at the level of identification, as you mentioned, but I would perhaps argue that this is actually internalization. It is beyond identification within an attractive referent group. It is an internalization of like an idealized reference group, and it's the people who have taken on these attitudes and then actions of denial of the racial reality of Jews, of denial of the gaslighting of October 7th. It is, they believe it is congruent with their value system. It is beyond an identification, it is an internalization.
Okay.
And I just bring that up also in response to this idea of interventions. We're not there. I mean, we're not there in a conversation, but I think unless we understand the causal, cognitive, affective, behavioral pieces of these attitude changes and the different levels in which they occur, we can't think about how to then intervene and create different attitude change. And so I just wanted to share it. We're using the word identifying a lot, but I just wanted to contribute to the conversation and arguing that I think this is actually an internalization beyond identification.
I think that that's really smart, and I'm limited as a political scientist. I'm so focused on political tactics and understanding what it is that they're doing to us. And when I have to say, and when I think about internalization, I think about how we Jews have internalized this, and I'm so angry at them. You're right. I haven't given sufficient attention. I just took a note to how it is that they've internalized this, so that they can continue to believe in the righteousness of their bigoted claims. Right? I mean, that's what you're asking us to think about, and that's excellent. That's really good.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is the following. When you analyze, for instance, the media, there is a disinformation campaign, especially in Arab media, and also, not only Al Jazeera, but also in other Arab media outlets, regarding, the rape and how they treat hostages. So they use the hostages policy, which Iran uses as well. But at the same time, they pretend that they are treating these people in a humane way, to the extent that we think that these people are not terrorists. They are just using it for as a tool to exchange and a negotiation tool with Israel. So this is the problem. The main problem is how they bring this misinformation campaign, especially by manipulating young people, manipulating the left, but also manipulating the Arab world and manipulating also the international media. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, really thank you, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to speak to you as a political scientist as well. You mentioned a lot of apt points. Myself, when I look at it, I see it goes well beyond. I look at it and I see it's structural and ideological. In which ways university today has given or has established structures in which certain ideologies have been grounded and they have been deepened. I'll give some example: black feminism, intersectionality, critical race theory, queer theory, and social justice as DEI. And why I mention that? I really, as I speak with them and my colleagues in my university and my other university, many of them are not anti-Semite. What really brings them together is oppression and how they see oppression. So the question here, as a matter of fact, it goes beyond where we have to deal whether the rise of anti-Semitism after October 7, or whether it is the rise of ideologies that implicitly and indirectly promote anti-Semitism. And as a political scientist, as a matter of fact, I go there, and let me tell you why. I organize events on my campus, on other campuses. I tried, as a matter of fact, few women, including the editor of the Jewish Journal, contacted me, said, Robert, we have to organize an event on rape and what happened. As a matter of fact, I went to my colleagues, and they all evaded me. Okay? So really, this is what I think. It's both the structures that the university established and those ideologies. And let me tell you one thing, as I mentioned, and that's what I am. They are not really anti-Semite, really. I don't think they are anti-Semites. But I think that somehow the oppression, and when they look at Israel, and this is the picture Israel has to really defeat and to remove, that it is the oppressor, it is this, it is that. And something about this ideology from Greek. You cannot study black feminism without, or intersectionality, without linking oppression and linking it to Israel. And they say it, front, Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. I have one question. In the gaslighting process, what do you think woke played a role? This is my first question. Because you mentioned about those professors, usually they're they're connected with the gender studies, etc. And second is that I totally understand when you say families don't want their children to be remembered by this way.
Yes.
But when what we, because actually most anti-Semites are from the non-Jewish group people. And when I'm teaching in China, I found it very difficult to teach on 7th October. On one hand, government support Hamas, and all necessary information all censored. Like Hatufim is not translated as Hatufim in Chinese state media. And students will come to me and say that it's in my class, it's their first time to know about the rape crimes committed by Hamas. So every necessary information was just censored in China.
Yeah.
So the problem is that when I teach that, I also have no videos, no pictures that I can use. And I know the 47-minute documentary was actually denied open access to the rest of the world. So this is so hard for teaching or spreading the right information among the non-Jewish group. And actually, what the group here is mostly Jewish members, and but we are facing a challenge in the non-Jewish group about the anti-Semitism after the 7th October. So this is also, I know, a dilemma. I know that the families don't want to share the pictures and videos, but for spreading the right information, we need the pictures and videos. Yeah.
So I want to work backwards a little bit. I still have a couple minutes. I'm going to tell you something that we struggle with the same thing here. Go like this. Here's the evidence. It's so clear. And I was heartbroken when Israelis, I was heartbroken. They were like, we've got the evidence, we're going to show 43 minutes. I've worked against pornography for over 40 years. Because I was a kid, against pornography. And I knew that wasn't going to work. Why? Because the fact that that kind of evidence, pornography is the graphic, sexually explicit nature of the subordination. You're all told in women and gender studies, it's consensual, it's freedom, it's sex positive. This is what they've done. Pornography is the documentation of sexually explicit subordination. And the fact that it's seldom regarded as evidence, so I have to tell you, even if you showed, if you showed the 43 minutes, the fact that it is seldom regarded as evidence of harm testifies to the success that men and the women who support that have had in concealing sexual abuse by photographing it. I'll give a racial analogy. With Rodney King, so I can do this, I'm older, right? Or by any number of men who you see being pulverized or murdered on the street. We live in a society, I'm going to watch it over and over and over again.
And it promotes the violence.
Yes, and you know what? No, I want to be honest, and it's a very hard lesson. It does not work to show it over and over and over again. You need to know that. It makes them excited, and it desensitizes people. So no, that won't work. That's why I didn't want to have the slide on for too long. So I want to convince you don't need that. You need to be able to talk to people. I'm not saying you don't need anything, because sometimes a little clip like that, it blows your mind. But no, let's not rely on that. So you asked about that, and I understand Chinese censorship. And then I want to work to the initial part of your question, which had to do with wokeness, because you're living under a communist regime. Woke came from that. Woke is all about consciousness. You can't argue with somebody who thinks that you do not possess consciousness, because if you disagree with them, you're falsely conscious. Woke is nothing but the latest iteration of referring to someone as consciousness because you know the world. That's what woke is. There's nothing really that new about it. There's no null hypothesis, for those of us in social science, there's no null hypothesis for you are falsely conscious. End of debate. That's a censorious position. That's China.
Yeah, I just want to add 2 points and a third, if I may. The young woman, Shen Yiluk,
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. I don't know if many of you know, but that photograph won Best Photograph of the Year by Associated Press. That itself is very telling of this moment and what you are discussing with women and what we privilege and who took the picture, right? Who took that picture? Of course, a fellow terrorist. The second thing is, okay, all right. Right, but who was this photographer who was going into Gaza? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
But the family, I will say, this is another
so-
reason why I don't want to shut her family, right,
Okay,
but the
but-
family doesn't want us,
Of
and this is
course.
why I feel
But do you
horrible.
understand, my point here is that this, to make this the picture of the year itself,
Yeah.
number one.
Okay.
Number two, the young lady who was taken from the back to the front, remember? And my mom pointed this out to me. She said, notice that they blurred, that initially we saw her pants, but then the media blurred it. It's excising, right? For our viewership. So that's very important as well. And the third thing I'm going to say, I'm not surprised that the women are at the forefront in the gender studies of denialism, because I'm not surprised because the women's movement and the Me Too movement and that Believe Women slogan was moral bankruptcy is what it was, because it doesn't really mean believe all women. When you start privileging identity politics over truth, that's where we get in trouble. So I just wanted to make that point.
So, Naya, thank you. So, that's a very powerful point to end. Our time is up. And
That's
Amy,
it.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
So much.
Hey, thank you so